everyone, and welcome back to Truce Talks. We have a very special day today, a very special guest, and this is a very special time in the life of the cultures on this planet. It's a very unsettling, unquieting, stressful time for people. And my guest today, and my friend and my neighbor and my garden soulmate, is Robin Afinowich. Robin is a very gifted therapist. She is an extraordinarily unique and powerful yoga instructor. And she is a very special gardener. She's learning a lot from her garden. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Robin, welcome. It's so good to see you.
Hi, Diane. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I walk by Robin's garden frequently because it's on my walking path. Robin lives a block away from me on the other side of the street. And I've watched her change that piece of property over the decade that she has lived there, and it's been absolutely magical. And what are you exploring now in your garden? What are the aspects of the garden you are using to get you through this period of pandemic panic?
Well, lots of aspects. There's lots and lots of layers to it. And, that's what the garden teaches, is that there's lots and lots of layers to life. And every little pocket affords different experience and information and meaning into it. And what I've been playing with for the last few years, particularly, is this balance between control factors and wildness. And, for me in my work with psychology, I very much think that it applies to our ability to accept things and let them be organic and let life have its own course, its own flow. But there are also times where we need to come in and modify and adapt and change and nourish and, create an environment that is more sustainable. And the garden teaches me that it's kind of a little bit of both. So it's really interesting. As you see when you walk by, there are areas that are very specifically defined. This is my area for basil or squash or yucca. And then there are areas that are literally just, I throw out seeds, yard clippings, I don't maintain it, and I let nature run its course. And the content that I get from both scenarios, that which is a controlled, solution-focused, experimental, kind of intellectual, cerebral, formulaic approach, and then that which is trusting in the laws of nature and observing the natural process without me getting in the way of it, without me having an attachment or an agenda to the way that it has to look or perform or produce. And so it's really interesting for my science brain, to compare, like, oh, isn't it fascinating? You can do all of these, you can try to manage and control all of these variables to create the perfect ecology. And I would translate that to the perfect self, but there's no guarantee that it's going to work, And then we can lean to this other aspect of the yard that says sometimes we just have to loosen the grip of what we think we know, loosen the grip of intellect, and let life happen and accept that process. So the garden gives me this very, I call it my practicing field, this experiential place where I can observe and connect to my most intuitive and instinctual and wild ways, and observe that through the land and what happens with the land and the plants and all the critters that come. And it also gives me a place to be kind of a scientist, an explorer, to learn what happens if you mix A with B, and what does C look like. So it feeds me, it feeds nature in general. It feeds I vacillate as a person and as a therapist and a teacher and as a person, just in the world, between my science brain and my soul heart. And nature feeds, there's my dogs. They're part of this ecosystem too.
They certainly are.
But nature is the thing that I have found that feeds the scientist in me and the soul in me. And I need it for my perspective of living. And I think that it's something that is a wonderful gateway for everybody.
And I think your observation that in reality, a garden cannot be controlled. It can be, you can try and capture it, you can try and confine it, you can try and make it do what you want it to do, but there's not a lot of learning in that. There's a lot of cookie cutter stuff that I see around in terms of landscapes. And I'm always drawn to the ones that are a little less controlled. Mine is, as you know, I refer to myself as a very blousy gardener. Stuff can just come and ramble and do its thing until I can't walk through it or something. But that's what I find and plus, when you get your flood irrigation back again, stuff comes in on the flood. And every 3 or 4 years, your complete first layer changes. It's like, oh, okay.
Well, and that's what's been really interesting, even without the flood irrigation, but just, and it's something that I think is really beautiful because we don't really have patience anymore as a people. And when, you know, and I remember my mom always saying that, you know, farmers and fishermen, those are the people that are the most patient, you know, and it's true, because even in just the last 5 years, seeing the top of the earth adapt and change every year, it's something new, you know. And it's because I'm willing to, like you are, let it unfold, you know, not have that agenda or that expectation, but to really become a witness to it as it's constantly adapting. I mean, we were talking the other day about how our summer season is getting so much longer. You know, we're at what, 7 months now? 8 months? You know, and even just being aware of plants that 5 years ago did really well, now they're not, and vice versa, you know. So it's changing so rapidly.
And people are not paying attention if they're living on the 5th floor of an apartment in an uber urban setting, like downtown Phoenix, like New York. I mean, there are other things that take their attention, but paying attention to what's going on in the natural world, whether it's a Central Park or it's our gardens, is really, really important. And I'm sure seeing that. We've talked about it. I'm losing fruit trees that are supposed to survive in the desert. They're just not anymore. They're not. So what do we do? You know, what do? We watch.
We watch and we listen and we learn. And I think it's that process of trusting too, you know, which is hard. It's hard. I mean, I've shared the story with many of my plants and trees that I've gotten attached to in my yard. And it's hard when trusting and leaning into that part of the process means death, or it means, you know, loss of a landscape as you know it, you know. And
talking
I think
about your Chinaberry tree.
I am.
Your beloved grandmother Chinaberry tree.
I am.
Talk about that a little bit. That's a wonderful, wonderful story and observation.
Well, I just, you know, not only do I compare nature to the psyche and the soul of individuals, but I think about it as a social context as well. And, you know, I knew for a number of years that tree was dying. And, you know, it was this big, beautiful Chinaberry. It had beautiful blossoms. It was quite messy. I will say that the berry part of it was, you know, required a lot of cleaning. But the tree was, in my probably very biased perspective, was in its full crone wisdom at the apex of my life when I had very little children. Oh, I'm getting emotional. I didn't think I'd get emotional. Sorry.
That's all right. That's real.
What nature does.
And that's what gardens do.
It does, you know. So this, you know, this wise crone of a tree was just this beautiful, beautiful canopy for a point where I was coming into a different type of my own, you know, womanhood with little kids, 2 little boys, and of course the nature lovers. And we would put a swing on the tree and play under the tree and climb the tree and talk to the tree and be with the tree. And it was just, kind of a staple to our everyday life. We would gather the berries, we would gather the little purple and white leaves. It was part of a family, as cheesy as it sounds. And the birds and everything around it. Just amazing. When I was going through, and interestingly enough, at I don't know, maybe the kids were 9 years old or so, the tree started getting sick. And this could be complete coincidence, but I'm always looking for metaphors. And it was around, I guess it was a little later than that, but it was around the same time that I was diagnosed with cancer that I noticed the tree starting to get sick. And so the tree then moved me into this other area of observation with nature and with myself that brought me very close to accepting death and disease and dying, and really not just cerebrally or intellectually understanding the cycle of life, but having a visceral kind of spiritual experience with my own quest of resiliency and survival through cancer, and watching this tree go through its own disease, which ultimately did end up, killing it. I still have its stump. I still kept parts of it. But that tree just always provided so much metaphor. And by choice, I was attached to it, and you're going to extract meaning from something if you take the time to create meaning from something. But the tree taught me a lot about life in the sense of youth and innocence and exploration and nourishment. And it taught me a lot about accepting death, and, gave me many years between. And, I don't, so that of course translates to our personal work in terms of our own individual healing. And I think that it correlates to the work with a social order. We're a culture that doesn't really talk about the cycle of life. And we are a culture, as you said, that are in towers separated from nature. So the majority of people aren't observing this process of life.
Right.
And it's disconnecting them not only from nature, but it's disconnecting them from a degree of peace that can come when we accept life and death as being an inevitable part of what we're all experiencing,
And I think a garden is uniquely, or any natural area is uniquely a teacher on that level. Because you see if a tree falls down, and you notice it, a tree falls down, that then becomes the nursery for the trees that come up. That's the way it works. But it's really hard when you have a special friend. I'm with you on that. I'm losing an apple tree, and it's coming down branch by branch, and I just can't bring myself to take the whole tree down. Yeah. It's going to have to do that itself, and that's because of the heat in the summer.
Yep.
But that connection.
Yeah.
And do you find it clearly more with trees than with a series of grasses?
Yeah.
And I think that it's really spectacular to notice that. That big old beefwood tree across the street by the garden? Mm-hmm. I worry about that tree every time a storm comes by. Yep. Because everything has a cycle, and you have to accept it. But it's true. We don't deal with death well.
No.
We don't at all. And the further we can remove ourselves. So it's interesting going through this pandemonium. Mm-hmm. It is pandemonium.
It is, yeah.
God, that's a strange juxtaposition. I know, but right? It's the same. It's that same thing. We're dealing with death on a level we've never globally dealt with it before. Yeah. And it's not a war. It's not a war. Yeah. It's just a secret killer. Yeah. And that's what gets our trees. It's always a virus or a bacteria that gets things. Yeah.
I admire that you're able to let that apple tree go on its course. I had hoped to do that for the China berry. And oftentimes, and the China berries, even when they're thriving, are very brittle. but it was, just a giant monster, and half of it had covered the roof. And so
Yeah.
that was another part of the acceptance and kind of the grief, is that I wanted to let that tree kind of meet her way down to the earth
Mm-hmm.
on her own volition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I had to interrupt it for my safety and the safety of the kids in the home and family.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But um, it is, that's one of my, although it's destructive, that's one of the things I love most about when the monsoon does come and you see all these trees that are, uprooted, and you see their roots. And then, I'll pull the car over and go and look, and all the life, and
Mm-hmm.
it's that perfect statement that nothing ever really dies. There's always something is going to come out of it, right?
Mm-hmm. It's a cycle. The cycle.
Yeah.
It's evolution. It's a cycle. And it's interesting. I always like to see where a micro blast has hit something,
Yeah.
and everything around it is fine, but there's this huge tree blocking the road. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah. And what a gift to be interrupted in the normalcy, to look at something so beautiful.
Yeah.
Even when it's down and out, it's beautiful.
We talked about the idea of the garden as sanctuary, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a uniquely female
Yeah.
response perspective on the garden. It is where I go to reconnect with myself as well as with the natural world. And
Mm-hmm.
half the plants, it's just always so embarrassing. Half the plants in my yard, I don't know what the names of them are anymore. I really don't. I keep thinking, you got to build a file so you know what's out
Yeah.
there. But I lose the little tags and things go away.
Mm-hmm.
The fruit trees I know, but
Yeah.
other things kind of, and it's like, wow, watch.
Yeah.
I just removed a whole bed of dead bamboo, and I
Mm-hmm.
replaced it with this other far more controlled container garden.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really not sure how I feel about that.
Yeah.
It's changed. Garden is constantly changing. You're never going to freeze it in time. Things grow,
Mm-hmm.
things die. And it
Mm-hmm.
is a way to deal with all those feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in terms of your garden, what's going on with the Chinaberry tree? Are you building, what has it evolved into?
Well, right now I don't know, I'm here. It's a stump.
Yep,
I don't
I
know if
see
you
it.
can see
Yeah.
that. So I wanted to keep part of her. And she's got she's got my little hippie altar on it. My stones and memories and things. But
Yeah.
around her,
Got it.
this is part of what I'm trying to do in my landscape as well, is work my way towards really water wise.
Good.
I love green, I love lush, but for me, I think there's a sensibility living in the desert in this time in our life where we have to be really water conscious, and I want to have more trees than I do grass. So my ultimate goal is lots of trees and lots of self-sustaining desert dwellers. So this area is it's a very weird area because I have, mothers of million and cacti and sages, but then I have really tender things like, mugwort and jasmine and things that typically are not supposed to pair well together. But what is interesting is even just this little stump is providing shade, and then in other areas more direct light, which has changed this area significantly, even in just 2 seasons.
And that stump is not totally dead. Its root system is still there. And those are the things that are bringing up some of the water and some of the nutrients that what's evolving around it need to have. So it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. There's lots of lizards, there's lots of bugs. And actually I'm getting ready to write a little blog about this, but it kind of blends perfectly with this conversation. I might have already told you about this, but I'll repeat it again. I was sitting here and I was noticing all the grass coming through, and it was kind of annoying me. You know, I was like, oh, this Bermuda grass, I just want rid of the grass.
Bermuda grass, yeah.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And it was all in this area. It was coming towards my mugwort. It was going towards a rose. It was, it was starting to invade. And so I was like, well, I gotta pull this. So I was annoyed by it, but I was also in that like kind of compartmentalized, that part of my brain that was saying, well, the rules of the world say pull your weeds, Robin, pull your weeds. So I was feeling like I needed to pull the weeds and pull the grass because that's the thing that makes your yard look nice, right? So I was vacillating with that in addition to just being annoyed.
And it's such a human construct.
Right. Half the weeds are medicine.
Exactly.
So,
and who says it's a weed? Who defines that? Nature
I know.
does it.
No, it serves its purpose. But in impulse, I went in and I started pulling the weeds in the grass.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was doing it, I pulled out a mallow that I've been trying to get to grow there. Just a globe mallow, but
just a globe mallow.
I know. It's taken 2 seasons for it to do what little, so
yeah.
that I ruined. So then I'm having an experience, and then in that, I kind of pause and find my breath and recognize, okay, Robin, you're attached, you're grasping, you've got an agenda. Like, this is not that space that you go into your garden with. Like, what is this teaching you? So then the work became let go of concepts, let go of constructs, let go of these ideas of what's normal and abnormal and allowed and not allowed. And literally in that adaptation of my thought, all these little green things started popping up off of my hand and the mallow and the weeds that I had. And they were little baby praying manti, and, which I take as a wonderful little gift to the ecology that is telling me you have a really diverse ecosystem here. And these weeds and this grass and now your pulled mallow are creating naturally an environment for lots of diverse critters to live in. And then my brain goes bing, 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 bing to what's going on with our global health and our pandemic and our immune systems and our isolation, and recognizing that nature thrives often, not always. We know that we could argue this both ways, but with diversity.
And with adversity.
And with adversity.
It
absolutely.
Talk about railroad tracks going through and what has happened, and weeds were spread all the way from the coasts inlet with the railroads because they tore these, and disturbance. Weeds love disturbance, and all kinds of things flourish.
Yeah. It's very interesting to use the garden as my own medicine and healing, my own process of exploration, and then to apply its principles. Let me know if that banging is too loud. I can go into.
It's the garden.
Okay. To apply its principles to what is going on socially, for me, that's a relief. Sometimes I look at a lot of times I look at what's going on socially and politically and systemically, and it can be very overwhelming, and yet when I look at it as an ecosystem, it affords me a little bit of grace and a little bit of space and a little breathing room to say, but it's a storm, right? There's so many nature metaphors that we could apply to it. So nature, lends its wisdom of acceptance in so many ways, whether it's diversity, adversity, resiliency, adaptation, spirituality, science, ecology, life, death. It is the ultimate blueprint for life. It has a lot to teach us.
Yeah. Mostly, I must admit, I turned for sanctuary.
Yeah.
The human eye, the healing colors are brown, green, and blue. Those are the colors of the earth. Yes, you get flowers and things, but the human eye actually needs to see those colors. When we don't see them often enough, your vision can actually deteriorate. And so going and looking at things up close where you see little baby praying mantises, that's incredible. How many people notice that in their garden?
I know.
You
And
know?
it's, yeah, the fine details of life.
Yeah.
Well, and even, what the microbes in the soil do for, I love working with, I work with a diverse population of people, but there's so much science and research and evidence-based practices about soil helping with depression, helping with
Mm-hmm.
our cortisol, helping manage our trauma, helping manage our stress, and it's great because it is a sanctuary. Like you're saying, you don't have to sit there and talk all the time. You just literally dig in, and it's medicine. It
Yep.
changes our chemistry.
Put your hands in soil, and it's amazingly healing. But do
Yeah,
you talk to your plants while you're messing around in the garden? I do.
I do. Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
think I'm moving over here.
I have a lot of interesting relationships with them.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they're entities to me, but I also
Yeah.
kind of prescribe to a more, animistic philosophy of life where everything has some sort of um, bigger component. She's
Yeah.
doing a job.
Yeah. But I think we share the love of the garden as a nurturing sanctuary. We can step out onto the green, onto living things, instead of all man-made constructs, everything that's concrete and brick and artificial. And this is real.
Yeah.
This is
It,
real.
yeah, the days that I am overwhelmed with industry or policy or whatever you want to call it, or even my own work. I mean, I love what I do, but it can be heavy.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that shifts me the most is within 2 minutes being outside, you know, it's that breathing room. It's that complete shift of realignment. I know for my nervous system that I respond very quickly. I have a very heightened nervous system. We all do, really, I think, at this point in the game.
God,
But
yeah.
it it is it is immediate, and I like it because it's quiet. I love people. I love creating community. I love teaching. I love healing. I love people. But I also grew up and am by nature a very introverted person, and grew up very much in the country and very much close with the land. And there is something really innate, I think, for some of us that are gardeners and land lovers, innate about quiet, just, and it helps my brain be quiet because I am a social scientist. I'm a psychologist, like my brain can be very busy, and which is great in application, but nature reminds me, oh, you can exist without having to be a highly cognitive being.
Mm-hmm.
you know um and that is such a gift.
There's something you just made me think of something.
Mm.
One of the Truce team members sent me this poem. It was sent to by it was released by, I guess, the president of New Zealand. A very,
Mm.
very interesting woman.
Yeah,
And
she's
she said something in this poem. I don't think she wrote it, but she said, um, talking about the pandemonium. There I go again.
mm.
People always said it wasn't possible to ground flights and stay home and stop our habits of consumption, but it was. It always was. We were just afraid of how much it was going to hurt. And it is hurting, and it will hurt and continue to hurt, but not as much as you have been hurt.
Mm.
So be still now. Wrap your heels around our absence. Loosen, oh, I'm getting emotional.
Yeah.
Loosen the concrete belt cinched tight at your waist. Rest, breathe, recover, heal. And we will do the same.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin. This
Yeah,
has been a really interesting conversation with you. And I hope we will do it again
I
on
do.
perhaps a regular basis and find out who's interested in gardening and
Yeah.
continue our exploration of that.
Yeah, I would love it.
I have a whole stack of books here for you to look through if you're
Thank
ever
you.
ready to do so, including one called Sanctuary, Gardens for the
uh
Soul, that I
yeah,
thought you might enjoy.
I would love
So
it. I would
yeah,
love it. Thank you.
when perhaps we can exchange things with a
Yeah.
lot less
Yeah.
temerity, we can do
Yep.
that.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
One final silly changing question for you.
Yeah.
If you could have a glass of wine or a cup of tea in your garden
Oh,
with anyone on the planet, living, dead, or fictional, who would you like to invite into your garden?
O'Donoghue, the Irish poet, writer, O'Donoghue.
O'Donoghue. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I will be seeing you very soon. You live right
Oh,
down the block, thank heavens.
thank
And
you.
thank you for sharing your morning with us.
All right. Very good. Thank you so much. Keep it up. Love your work.
Namaste.